Trivia question. Which came first, the 2008 recession or Sean Clifford's freshman year? Because I can't remember. He was there in Happy Valley for an eternity. He has finally moved on. He's in Green Bay now, of all places, in their quarterback room. But guys, this is kind of a new era for Penn State football, and it could be the most profitable era, the most championship ready era that they've entered into in quite some time. They're Rose Bowl champs. They beat Utah last year, win 11-2. Um, they were literally run over by Michigan and outraced by Ohio State in their games last year. Those were their two losses, two respectable losses. For them to take the next step, they have to address several areas of concern to beat a Michigan, to beat an Ohio State. And guys, I think they might be able to do it this year. Let's start with quarterback position. They are replacing a lot of wide receivers. I'll give you that. But Drew Aller coming in, who's supposed to be the promised one, coming in to play quarterback for Penn State. Saw action in 10 games last year, just 344 yards, 4 touchdowns, nothing flashy. But if you go back and put the tape on, what you saw was an advanced ability to recognize blitz packages, to recognize coverages. He's got a strong arm. He's got an accurate arm. And oh, by the way, he can run. He's a great dual threat athlete that Penn State has not had in quite some time to lead this offense. Throw in the fact that they're going to have a balanced attack because they have the second best running back room in the conference, in my opinion. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, they combined last year for almost 2,000 yards, 22 total touchdowns. That's a lethal group to work next to Drew Aller. Now, you say, okay, that's great. Young quarterback, running backs, what do they need? They need an offensive line. Well, Penn State's got one. The offensive line's an absolutely loaded group, bunch of veterans coming back. This is a team that should be able to move the football down the field. Now, I mentioned that they lost a lot of wide receiver production last year. Parker Washington's gone. Mitchell Tinsley's gone. I hear you loud and clear. It's a very, very talented group, albeit a young group. The transfers will help. They've got transfers in Malik McClain from Florida State and Dante Cephas, from Kent State. Absolute fireworks on a football field. If you didn't get to watch Cephas in any of the MACtion on a Tuesday night, just search his name on YouTube. He's a playmaker. He's a guy that can move all over. He's a guy that's going to be absolutely miserable to try and cover, whether it's underneath or downfield. So the offense for Penn State, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to rest on Drew Aller and his ability to be a difference maker as a young quarterback. Now you go, Mitch, why on earth is this any different than Kyle McCord at Ohio State? You just spent the last 20 minutes telling me why Ohio State's ceiling could be, or that your prediction is lower on them because of an inexperienced quarterback. For me, again, I go back to the tape. What have I seen on the field between Drew Aller and Kyle McCord? And for me, Aller's the better prospect. For me, Aller has better intangibles. He's shown me in live game action that he can handle a blitz, that he can diagnose a read at the line of scrimmage, audible someone into a hot route, and make the throw. Plus, he's a little bit more mobile than McCord is. So, could this all come crashing down on Penn State? Absolutely. Could Aller have a true, sophomore slump for him? This would be his first full season of starting? Absolutely. But when I turn on the tape and truly compare these two, I like Aller better. And for that reason, I'm going to give Penn State the advantage here when we're talking about predictions. Now, before we get to the defense, I want to hear where you guys are on Penn State's offense. I think their defense is going to be very, very good. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But because I'm so high on this offense, I think that 11-1 is a very real ceiling and, in my case, prediction for Penn State. That's why I have them coming out of the East. I have them beating Michigan at home, taking down the Wolverines on any given Saturday. I do have them losing to Ohio State on the road in the shoe, but the way that the records work out, Penn State gets to be the Big East nominee to go to the championship game.
It feels like it's time, doesn't it? Like it feels nothing against James Franklin. I think he's done a great job at Penn State. He's just gone up against two just behemoths every single year in the Big Ten East. And it feels like it's Penn State's turn. And if any year it was going to happen, I think this is probably the best offense that Penn State has had on paper since Saquon Barkley was roaming the sidelines. Definitely the best quarterback on paper that James Franklin has had at Penn State. Christian Hackenberg was very highly regarded as well, but I think Drew Aller is a little bit better prospect than him at this point in his career. And defensively, what has James Franklin and now Manny Diaz in his second year as defensive coordinator, what have they done to not give you confidence in them defensively? They're going to churn out great, secondary players. We've seen that year after year. Kalen King is next in line there. He's one of our breakout candidates this year. Went and got Storm Duck for North Carolina, all name team, but also a very good cover corner. And there's a lot of talent on this defense to really shut people down. We saw that on display last year, and they're bringing a lot of talent back as well. So I'm right there with you. I'm high on Penn State. What's giving me cause for pause is, again, just like we said with Ohio State, and like we've kind of hinting at with Michigan, is we're going to roll with what we've seen on the field until proven otherwise, right? That's kind of one of my rules for college football is you've got to prove it to me on the field before I really go all in on it. And I'm going to break that rule a little bit with one of my predictions later in the show. But for Penn State, before I get really all in on the hype train, I've got to see it. And there's a lot of points to make up. You look at those scores from last year against Michigan, Ohio State. Because again, we're not comparing Penn State to Maryland. We're not comparing Penn State to Rutgers. We're comparing Penn State to Ohio State and Michigan. It's a lot of points to make up from what happened last year. And it's hard for me to get excited about Penn State before I see the product on the field and before I see it against maybe even the second quarter of, the Michigan game all the way in November, the Ohio State game in October. Like if we're competing in the second quarter of that game, then maybe I'm all in on Penn State. But until then, I've really got to see it on the field against those two behemoths before I get really excited.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where my concern is for Penn State. And I want to maybe ask you guys about this. What about Penn State's sort of DNA do you really think is going to help them get over the top, right? Like we know the passing game's probably an improvement here, and that's going to help for sure. But similar to where Ohio State is and kind of what we said there, they've had good running backs at Penn State, right? Then they're going to have a great pair of running backs again. They've played good defense. And outside of just an improved pass game, which I think we can kind of expect, what about the DNA is there? Because as I look at the schedule, I'm looking at this and saying, you don't really have a test until the end of October with Ohio State, that October 21st weekend. They don't really have a whole lot that's probably going to be on their schedule to really push them. I know Iowa's solid, but I don't think we expect too much of an offensive performance out of them this year either.
We'll see. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll talk Iowa in a little bit. But if you look at the end of that schedule, at Ohio State, at Maryland, followed by Michigan, I don't know. I see some opportunities to slip up on the road, some opportunities against some better teams. And so I want to know kind of what about this team? What about, this iteration of Penn State do we think is going to be really different than previous iterations?
For me, it's the front seven. So last year when Michigan, if you'll pull up the schedule graphic again, Garrett, last year when Penn State played Michigan, that was the front half of the season, right? The sixth game of the year. Penn State went into that game as the number one rushing defense in the country. Everybody thought, okay, it's the top rushing offense. It's the top rushing defense. This is going to be a clash of the Titans. And Penn State got blown out of the stadium. And the main issue was the linebackers at Penn State had a very rough learning period under Manny Diaz in the first half of the season. Now, they put it all together late, started to play a lot better with that front four to make it a collective and cohesive unit, and they ended up having the 17th best rushing defense in the country. That's a far cry from tops in the country, and I understand that. But when I watched how that unit evolved, the linebackers were not good against Michigan. They were nowhere to be seen while Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum were rushing through the A gap, right? I mean, it just wasn't even a contest. Trying to get around the corner, nobody there to cut off the angle of attack. I think this year playing Michigan later in the season can be a difference maker. Now, again, we'll see injuries, health, etc. All of that completely up for grabs once we get into the regular season. But as I'm projecting forward, how does Penn State make up that egregious point deficit against Michigan, you have a more explosive offense that can throw the football down the field more consistently. You balance that with a great running attack, and then you stop the run. And I think they're equipped to do both of those this year, plus get to the passer a lot better, right? On the edge, you're talking about a guy like Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac. They both combined for 9.5 sacks last year. Chop Robinson is going to be one of those names that you hear probably called close to, if not in the first round of the NFL draft next season. One of the elite edge rushers in college football today. You throw in Kalen King, Storm Duck, Trey, like you said, in the secondary. I think this is the most complete team that Penn State has fielded in quite some time. And to your point, it really does feel like a if not now, then when situation, right? If Franklin isn't going to get to 11-1, get to a Big Ten championship game with this team, then when is he going to do it? And so for all of those reasons, for truly believing that, hey, it's a oval ball that bounces in funny ways sometimes, and statistical mean does play some sort of effect here when we talk about regressing. I do think that I don't believe in it's this team's turn, but I do believe that Penn State has a better shot than what folks are giving them, because I think getting Michigan at home is a big deal. Counting on Ohio State to run the table, go on 11-1. Eventually, that's not going to happen. I choose to believe that it's this year that Penn State hangs a banner.
Gracious, how about that?